from the DFFE. Thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Chairperson. Good morning to yourself, Deputy Chairperson, commissioners in the room, ED, and all present in this meeting. I'm going to be brief in terms of opening remarks because we have prepared a presentation that is going to take the commissioners through all the areas that we have been requested to come in and share an update on. But let me firstly thank the Commission for inviting us to provide this update, very critical update in as far as the Climate Change Act and also regulations on PCC and the business case. And already the ED has alluded to some of the aspects in terms of the progress, and our presentation will cover then the details in relation to this. The Climate Change Act, as we all know, is mainly focusing, especially when you look at Chapter 2, it focuses on the establishment of the PCC. And also what then are the policy alignments that are critical and institutional arrangements that really should be supporting the carrying out of the responsibility for the PCC. The regulations will therefore provide the operation and also administrative and administration of the PCC, clarifying on how then PCC should be conducting its strategic function. And I think the presentation will go into details where we are in terms of those regulation. Business case is critical for the establishment of the PCC as a Schedule 3A in terms of the PFMA. And we're working very closely with the ED and also with National Treasury in as far as this is concerned. We are in our presentation going to go into details in as far as all these issues. And let me assure the commissioners that we are doing every thing in our powers to ensure that we operationalize the Climate Change Act. There are, however, just two aspects in as far as the Climate Change Act that we are still engaging with National Treasury on. It's mainly around the finance and support mechanism. And the second one is linked to the business case, which is mainly around the listing of the PCC in terms of the PFMA. Without waste of time, I'm going to request the DDG Kekana, who is in the room, just to take the meeting through the details that we have prepared. And I would have loved to be there physically. Unfortunately, I'm down with flu, but I felt it is quite critical for me to be in this meeting this morning. Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. Let me hand over to DDG Kekana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG Shabalala. You have a standing invitation to all commission meetings, and therefore we would really welcome your participation at some future point, as often as you wish, for our quarterly meetings. And thank you very much for the framing remarks that you've made. DDG Maisela Kekana, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chairperson, and good morning to yourself and the commissioners and everyone in the meeting. And thanks to the DG for framing the presentation that we're going to make now. Before I start with the presentation, I just want to highlight that all the work that we are doing around the PCC, whether be on the business case or the regulations that were drafted and consulted on. We're doing this with the PCC Secretariat. So wherever I fall short, I expect the Secretariat to then add. Let me go straight into the recs themselves. I don't think I can see that far. I'll just open it on my computer as well. All right. The regulations that were crafted and consulted on consist of 5 chapters. The first chapter speaks to the interpretation, purpose, application of the regulation. And this is just about the administration and operation of the commission. Then when you go to the chapter 2, which is about the objects and governing principle of the Presidential Commission, it just provides the object of the commission and explain this as to facilitate dialogues between social partners and provide advice towards a long-term just transition and so forth. So that is chapter 2. Chapter 3 talks to the administration matters. It defined the responsibilities, process of appointments, termination of services, and this talks to the executive director and the secretariat. And then chapter 4 is around the financial matters, whereas chapter 5 is general matters. But let me just go a little bit into the details on this. We know that the PCC responds to 3 things, climate change response, and there we talk about mitigation and adaptation, and socio-economic partners. And the model of the PCC is largely working with governments and social partners. So those are the 3 pillars. Then on the governing principles of the commission and operation, this is where you are anchored with the parliamentary oversight. We're talking about the parliamentary oversight and the resource efficiencies, but also this then talks to issues of scientific objectivity, meaningful participation, and the transparency. And I'll come back to this last 2 things, which are critical, the transparency and meaningful participation. On the executive director, and the regulations are quite clear on the appointment mechanism. This must be a competitive process, and the regulations are quite clear that the minister holds the power to remove or suspend the executive director for misconduct or incapacity following an inquiry. Right? So that is clear. Then the next slide, it talks about the secretariat, which is the engine really of the commission. And the regulations talk to the administration and logistic and the scientific research work that the secretariat is responsible for. The strategic communication, something that we can all learn from because it's working very well in the PCC. Then the implementation and monitoring. So this broadly is defined in the regulations. I think I'll just skip this slide because just talk about the human resource financial controls and outputs. The role of the executive director vis-a-vis that of the rest of the secretariat, but the regulations make this very distinct and clear in terms of the flow. How should the executive director conduct themselves when it comes to those three areas, and then the secretariat on the rest of the secretariat on the other side. This slide talks to what the ED spoke about. And on the left is just a continuation loop of what needs to be reported on a continuous basis. Then you've got your annual milestone where we need to submit the annual report and financial statements. Then the biannual cycle, we talk about publishing an independent state of climate change response. And then, of course, the 5-year report and review, as the ED just explained in her report to the commission. So this is the what we call the commission's operational rhythm, right from day to day up to the 5-year period. The budget, I will not talk to this, and just keep, it's quite a lengthy presentation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this slide because this is important, especially when you start to become a Schedule 3 entity in terms of financial misconduct, whether it's irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. There's two processes. The first part is the default rule where the executive director is held responsible, and then there's consequence management or consequence protocol that is outlined in that case. But as we all know, if this happened and the executive director was instructed by the commission, it says forced by the commission to conduct that particular activity, and this can only be in writing. It happens everywhere. As long as it's in writing, you have to execute. That's how the system works. Then the executive director is absolved from that, but you still need this consequence protocol to kick in that scenario. So the default mode is this irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. ED responsible for that, or the ED had advised the commission that that would lead to that, and the commission in writing instructed to carry on, then the ED is absolved from that particular responsibility, but the protocol then kicks in. The regulations also go into details in terms of governance safeguards, and talks about the delegation from the commission to the executive director, and at any stage the functions can always be revoked, but this is explained in great details in the regulations themselves. In terms of transparency, we know that this is the core function of the commission. It must be transparent. There's a transparency mandate. The information must be disclosed to the public upon request, and you have to adhere to Promotion of Access to Information Act. So that is a given, but also that has to be balanced with the protection of the protocol. So access to information or request for that, for access to the information always needs to be balanced against keeping state secrets. So the regulations are quite clear in terms of where the balance lies and what you can and what you cannot disclose. So those are the regulations, and I'm sure once we've promulgated the specific sections, then this can go out for implementation. And as Gigi said, we are almost there when it comes to that, except for those two areas that she mentioned. Now, moving on to the business case, and this is where we've been also working with the commission, with the secretariat of the commission. I'm not so sure whether this is necessary, but suffice to say that we looked at the three scenarios, the PCC being a full component of government, or Schedule 3B, meaning business enterprise, but and Schedule 3A, public entity. But of course, the Act itself talk about Schedule 3A, the Commission being Schedule 3A. And you can see that Schedule 3A is quite important. It gives you political insulation. There's no commercial mandate. In the funding source primarily from the fiscus. Of course, you can also use the donor grants, and it's in alignment with Section 10(2) of the Climate Change Act. So basically, that's what was agreed, that the PCC will be Schedule 3A. I'll skip this slide because it just talks to what we know, the chairperson being the president, and all the outer layers, what currently exists. I don't think my slides were moving on the other side. I want to talk about the yes, the implementation roadmap. Phase 1, which is the approval phase, involved cabinet review of the business case and approval. And it also includes National Treasury Joint Evaluation Panel review and consent. Then the Minister of Finance in terms of listing of the PCC in Schedule 3A. And finally, presidential proclamation of the Act. So this is going to be finalized in 27, 28. Then from there, we'll move into phase 2, which is the appointment of the executive director, CFO, and CEO, and conclude all the other legal arrangements and start to operating under the PFMA. Then the staffing migration plan from NETLEC, and finally the PCC being fully operational as an independent entity, submitting its first independent annual performance plan. So that is phase 2, which is post 2027-28 financial year. Progress to date. The business case is currently under review, where there's consolidation of inputs from National Treasury, NETLEC, DFFE, and DPSA. And this is supposed to be concluded by end of June. But of course, my colleague who deals with this on a day-to-day basis can update whether we are still going to meet that particular deadline. End of June is next week. So that is as far as the business case is concerned. Then the last area, which is the implementation of the Climate Change Act. Just 2 slides here, and I think we can go through the slides. The Act was promulgated 2024, and what has happened since that time, there's a lot of activity around that. The first one being the development of the adaptation scenarios, and this is ready for public consultations. We've also done the technical guidelines as required by the Act for needs and assessment, and this is also ready for public consultations. Sector impact modeling is underway, and there's comments that have already been received from water and agriculture. The PCC regulations is what we just presented. They're about to be published for implementations once the other process is concluded. And I must add there that possibly before the end of July, we should be in a position where we are able to publish these regulations. So is the carbon budget regulations that have also been concluded together with the PCC regulations. So there's quite a number of things that have been done. We also started to look at the issue of the long-term low emission development strategy as required by the Climate Change Act. This will be published before the end of 2026. So we are almost there, finalizing the consultations. Parallel to that, we are also doing what we call the Good Life development narrative to inform the long-term low emission development strategy. So this is just another way of doing the strategy, but from the bottom-up approach to say, where do you want to see your society in 2050 in terms of resilience and emission reduction, as opposed to the top-down approach, which is the emission caps and what subsequently should then follow. Very interesting approach. Also, the draft sectoral emission targets, of course, en route to cabinet for public comments, and we spoke about this in the previous commission meeting. And the last point in terms of the activities around the implementation of the Act is around the greenhouse gas reporting regulations, which were last updated in 2026. in 2016. They have been reviewed to align with the carbon budget requirements. So that, in a nutshell, is what is currently being done and what is concluded, and just awaiting the publication from the other side, where we have to do the presidential minutes and get the president to finally proclaim whatever is remaining of those regulations. So those that are, once that process is concluded, then we will be in a position to then publish what is concluded, such as the PCC regulations and the others that I spoke about. But that, in brief, is where we are. We have, since preparing this presentation, received all the necessary go-ahead from the Office of Chief State Law Advisors. So we've prepared documentation for our minister, and once that is signed, or once the minister has signed those, then we will send them to the president for signing and proclamation. So hopefully on or about 30 July, the department will then publish the proclamation in Government Gazette. And then the proclamation, as we do it, it will be simultaneous with the PCC regulation, carbon budget and mitigation plan regulations, and so forth. Then we will be left with just those two areas that the DG spoke about, and these are processes that involve consultation with the National Treasury. Recall Section 18 of the Climate Change Act that talk about the financial support mechanism. That is one. And then the second one is this Section 12, 6, 13.1, 13.2, 13.3, B, 14.3A, 15.5, 15.6, and all this relates to the business case that we just presented. But otherwise, from what I presented, you can see the implementation would then be almost on full swing once these processes are hopefully concluded by the end of July. Thank you, Deputy Chairperson.
DDG Kekana, thank you so much for that very detailed presentation. As you can see, real traction has been achieved in creation, not just of the regulations, but also organizational preparation for the future of the PCC. I will take comments and questions. Professor Field first.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Kekana.
Sorry, to assist me, those who do want to say something, if you can just turn your name tag like that, so I can actually see that. Professor Field, go ahead. No, I've recognized you.
It's like raising your hand. Just on the progress, what is the roadmap and the projected timeline to bring in the adaptation provisions in the Climate Change Act? Because from that list, I didn't see that being featured.
Be happy to take a few questions if there are any, and then hand over back to the DDG. Dr. Gallant.
Yes, thank you for a very detailed presentation. I would like to know your scientific research. How much have you progressed in that field? Can you just elaborate more on that, please?
Thank you. Dr. Mate.
Thank you, Deputy Chair, DDG Kekana as well, for the presentation. I've got two very short questions. The first one has to do with the ED reporting. Is the ED going to be reporting to the minister or reporting to some kind of a structure? Let's call it a board or commission. If you can just clarify that, and is the AD the accounting officer or accounting authority? I saw you referring to accounting authority in your slides. If you can just clarify that. So that's the first question. The second one, you did mention in passing, DDG Schedule 3B. Is that still open to be considered, or Schedule 3A is now fixed? And I'm asking it in the context of Schedule 3A, you depend on the state. And we all know that the state does not have funds. So Schedule 3B may actually create that flexibility going forward. And then the last one, the sector impact modeling, does it also cover ICT sector? ICT, especially with all the data centers that are mushrooming, has got a huge impact on the carbon footprint. So will that still be considered if it's not yet being considered? Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Dr. Mata. ED, comment, question, or you want to respond to one or other of the questions?
No, can't respond. Just two issues that maybe it would help if the DDG can clarify for commissioners. I've had questions around fiduciary responsibilities of commissioners, given that commissioners are not board members, so there would be a slight difference there. So would be great if we provide that clarity. The second one is and maybe we can think through this together, a potential gap that we might face, as DDG mentioned, the regulations might certainly be promulgated by end of July. And in the regulations, it says they are effective from date of signature, which might be that date by end of July. And at that date, we wouldn't be done with the treasury process of listing the PCC as an entity under PFMA. So therefore, and the provisions in the regulations are based on PCC being a Schedule 3A. If we can also clarify that legal disjuncture and how we would deal with it. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. DDG Kekana, floor is back to you.
Thanks, Chairperson. I didn't quite hear the question there. Maybe if you can just...
Yes, you mentioned about scientific research. Can you please elaborate on the scientific research that you are busy with, please?
DDG, perhaps I should respond to that, because one of the foundational parameters that the Commission is expected to live up to and observe is, in fact, consensus seeking across our social partners and groups, as well as alignment, with, of course, independent influence over government policy by way of recommendations. But the further stipulation is that this is not just a negotiating body. This is a body that is premised on rigorous scientific thought and analytical processes, where trade-offs need to be made. Those trade-offs need to be made again on an empirical basis, rather than at the whim of one or other individual or group of commissioners. And so, DDG Kekana, if you can just confirm that in fact we are mandated as the PCC to hold dear to scientific and rigorous analytical methods over and above strong viewpoints that certain commissioners might have as we process our technical reports, our apex recommendations, etc.
Thank you, Deputy Chairperson. And yes, I can confirm, but also just to add that it's not just for DFFE, but the whole of government that the Commission is involved. Maybe I may invite my DG to talk about some of these difficult issues around fiduciary responsibilities of the commissioners and the likes. And of course, Mr. Mabena will talk about sectoral impact modeling, whether it involves ICT. But DG, maybe if you want to assist me there, thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the questions from the commissioners. I think in as far as, and I think the ED is correctly highlighting it, that the commissioners are not necessarily similar to boards that are established in terms of the Companies Act. So in this case, the PCC is established in terms of the Climate Change Act, and the fiduciary responsibility are more likely going to be aligned to the PFMA. So within the PFMA, you would have very clear, and also PFMA, there's regulations, and also around governance issues. The commissioners then would then need to conduct themselves in line with those governance related areas in as far as the PFMA and regulations that are backing up the PFMA. So it's going to be a bit different from a board per se. And maybe it also links to the clarity question. I think Dr. Mate was also raising a clarity-seeking question around the ED being a accounting authority. And basically, I think those are very clear responsibilities of any entity that is listed as a 3A, whereby then the accounting or the CEO, or in this case, it's the ED, then they then are playing the role of an accounting authority. And they are then tasked in exercising duties and ensuring that all governance is in place, and also ensuring that they do then their regular reporting as expected and as required by the PFMA. Obviously, the ED would be reporting to the commissioners, and of course, through the deputy chair will then keep the minister and the president informed, and will have to be then reporting in line with the reporting requirement of your annual every 5 years. It would have to go through the minister into the president. But the ED will work very closely with the commissioners, reporting to the commissioners, though playing the role of an accounting authority, which is very similar to all other Section 3A entities. The other part, I think, was around whether the option of 3B is open. I would want to believe that that can be explored at a future point in time. For a start, I think 3A, given that there has to be some form of funding from government. Yes, government is currently constrained, but as the entity is established as 3A, and they realizing that their business model is such that they can be self-sustaining, you can always approach National Treasury to be then listed as a 3B. 3A also takes into account that as an entity, you have some aspect of a public good, which requires some funding of some sort from government. But once you demonstrate that you are able to be self-sustaining, moving that gate or the possibility of being a 3B then is then opened. So I would want to believe that 3A is an initial. Once the entity demonstrates financial sustainability, then it can then be upgraded and established as a 3B, because there you need to not require any funding from government. So I thought maybe I would just respond to that. So I'm hoping Deputy Chair on the fiduciary responsibilities, one has actually clarified that it is very different from the Companies Act as stipulated for ordinary boards. This one is aligning to the governance principles of the PFMA, which then can actually be clarified further for the commissioners. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you for that, DG. If I can just add, although the Act stipulates 3A, there is also in the Act the provision for other sources of funding for the PCC. So to Commissioner Marche's point, I think we have been given, in some respects in this interim period, the best of both worlds. But to remove the stipulation of which schedule of the PFMA we are would require legislative change. And as you know, legislative changes are quite difficult to anticipate in terms of how long or short that process might have to go through the parliamentary process. The promulgation date mismatch, does someone want to speak to that?
No, it's fine. It's something that we can take offline with legal because it's a legal issue. But Mr. Mabena wanted to clarify the modeling, but the ICT issue. But before you come in, let me respond to the very first question on the adaptation. In fact, it's part and parcel of that because I've reported in the slide number 24 around the climate change adaptation and scenario work that we are doing, but also the technical guidelines for needs assessment. So and this have to be sequential because then the next process would be the actual revision of the national adaptation plan itself, which has to be reviewed every 5 years. So there are certain steps that you need to do to come to that point. The first one being the scenario work that we immediately ran with as soon as the Act was being designed, so that we don't have to take too long before we come to the revision of the plan itself. And the second issue around the needs assessment and so forth. So we've sequenced the work also depending on what is possible now, but also then to also allow us to be able to fund that particular work that needs to be done until we get to that stage. The other important thing that you see in the slide that we've presented around the emissions reductions work, which is the LEDS, the long-term low emission development strategy, we also had to do that because according to the Act itself, and now going forward, when we do the NDCs, the National Determined Contribution, they then have to be informed by that. Currently, the Act says the NDC would stay in place until we have done, the minister has done this long-term plan. So we had to sequence them in that particular manner. But if there are other issues that needs further clarity, we can always do that, including after this meeting. We are always open to that. But Mabena, maybe you come in here.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Well, in terms of the proclamation, basically, as the DGG has mentioned, the department has been working on 3 building blocks. The first one, the Climate Change Act. That one, if I may use a color coding system, we have got a clean progress to say that the PCC has been established, as an entity, as informed by the Act. Then in terms of the regulations, I would put it light green to say that progress, has been made also in that space. What is left is the final, step where the regulation will be publicized, will be gazetted for implementation. Now, the business case, we are actually finalizing the business case end of this month, July. And then what will happen in terms of the regulations, they will be signed by the minister. Then as the DG has mentioned, what will then the final proclamation on finance will then await finalization of the business case. So once the business case is finalized, then the finance component of the regulation will then be proclaimed into law. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Tandile, you covered?
Chair. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify in case I missed it in the presentation. The timelines for the finalization of the sectoral emission targets was stipulated there.
Yes, Chairperson, I think the sectoral emission targets, we made a presentation to this commission that there's significant work that has been done. And the next step really is to publish. However, if you look at the sectoral emission target, they are also informed by the carbon tax, right? And the carbon tax itself is still, there's still discussions around that. So we're just waiting for those discussions to provide clarity. Then it will go either way, whether we amend the targets before we publish, or if we go ahead with publishing as they are. But there's dependency there, and that is where we are at the moment.
Thank you, DDG. Commissioner Kungeka.
Chair, thank you very much, and thanks again to the DDG and the DG for their interventions. Just clarity, I'm not sure if it's a matter for the regulations or the business case. At the back of my head is the issue. We spoke a lot about the role of the ED and the commissioners. But what was not clear in my head is who determines the capacity of the secretariat overall? Because that's a critical matter that's important for this commission in terms of effectiveness. In other words, where does that responsibility lie? Is that a matter of regulations? Where is that the matter that the commission has accountability for, or the minister? Can we get clarity on that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Kungeka. I'll take Brandon. Commissioner Brandon.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. I just want to go back to Commissioner Field's question and DDG Kekana's answer on the adaptation. So the Act obviously envisages these timeframes for the preparation, a year after proclamation, then it's scenarios and objectives, another year after that it's national plan, and then sectoral, and then needs and vulnerability assessments at the municipalities. Until that proclamation happens, no one can be held accountable for these quite key deliverables. I think I'm not saying that was the Commissioner's question, but what is the intended date that actually then sets that chain of sort of action into motion and creates accountability?
DDG.
Maybe the ED would be in a better position to answer the first question in terms of staffing. But I thought it's clear. But let me just deal with the second one before you come in. The July signature date is the magic date. But of course, in anticipation of exactly what you were saying, that's why we started these processes, such that by the time you get to this stage, you've done all this work, and you can then just we avoided doing exactly that, doing the first proclamation and then everybody having to run around to adjust to the date. So all these packages will put us in a good state to then comply with that once you get that signature. Thanks.
ED?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. The regulations, and I think there was a slide on that. There's two areas in terms of delegations. Firstly, the minister appoints the executive director, and then the executive director is responsible for resourcing the secretariat. But that resourcing of the secretariat is informed by key priorities set by commissioners. And at inception, when the entity is registered, all of that will be informed by what's been mentioned as the business case. So in the business case that's currently under review by GTEC, the full organizational structure has been put into place in terms of, this is the business case for the PCC and how it will be resourced. And moving forward as we implement, it's the delegated responsibility of the accounting officer, who is the ED. Thank you.
Maybe I should just weigh in here as well, partly as a result of having observed the tempo of activity over the last 6 months, that the ED is accountable. And we must not only accept that and enthusiastically embrace that notion. The second thing I wanted to say is that DDG Kekana made very clear that if there is an instruction to be given to the ED to do a certain thing in a certain way, that must be in writing, and that then exposes the commission as to responsibility. Finally, I think just from an ethos, organizational culture point of view, I certainly would err on the side of absolute trust in the ED's integrity, firstly, but secondly, decision-making abilities, and then professional capabilities. And in turn, especially the professional members of the Secretariat, to give them the kind of space that they need to do this inquiry of a scientific nature that we've been talking about. And so maybe for a later stage, as we storm and norm as a commission, we need to embrace a certain organizational ethos of trust and confidence. In case there is an absence of that in anyone's mind. The final point, DDG Kekana, I wanted to make is that the PCC is enabled, mandated, and authorized by a section of the Climate Change Act. It is not responsible for the Climate Change Act. It is, in fact, the relevant executing authority that is responsible for other elements of the Climate Change Act. And for avoidance of doubt, and I think we need to make this quite clear, we saw this in the case of how government finalized its NDCs through a particular process. At each point, whether it is the long-term emissions pathway, whether it is within that, the sectoral emissions target, hopefully all informed on a scientific basis by political economic reality of our country's structure, as well as by the commitments that we've made in the NDC. In the end, the sets become a responsibility of government. And to the extent that the PCC might have a view on the issue, I think DDG, we've certainly embraced in partnership the ability of the PCC to make inputs. I would like to think of a slightly higher standing than just the public inputs, but nonetheless, we also, through our net zero work and our pathways work, have a reasonably scientific basis of informing as well as probably inputting into the sets as it relates to what makes most industrial economic growth as well as just transition sense as it relates to which sectors need to make what kind of contribution to the decarbonization process. So I think the Climate Change Act remains a responsibility of the various executing authorities named in the Act, within which the PCC has a mandate to do certain things. So I just wanted, for avoidance of doubt, to make that as a statement. Any other comments? If not, I must say we're doing reasonably well with time, not completely well, but reasonably well. DDG, thank you so very much. I think your presence here, as well as Mr. Mabena's presence, certainly shows that we are working in a collegial and lockstep manner to give effect to the Climate Change Act, and as it relates to the establishment of the PCC, we've certainly come a long way from the early days of debate around what certain parts of the Act mean. And if we're reaching the point where regulations are about to be finalized and promulgated, certainly as a commission, I think I speak on behalf of all of us, we appreciate this joint working and your department's endeavors as well to give effect to the Act. You're welcome to stay longer. Oh, and DG Shabalala, thank you so much for your presence as well. We appreciate that you've taken the time out of a very busy diary to be with us. And I want to, on behalf of the Commission, thank you very, very much for the strategic framing, as well as some of the direct answers that you've provided with respect to some of the questions that commissioners have. So thank you very, very much to the whole College of DFFE colleagues. Thank you. You're welcome to stay or exit. We're agnostic.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to request that I be excused. I have to join my minister. There's an engagement that is ongoing. I need to rejoin that meeting. But thank you so much to yourself and also to the commissioners, and hopefully in future one will be able to be there physically. I've noted the standing invite. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, DG. Thank you very much. Colleagues, DFFE, DTG, and Mr. Mabena, thank you also. We're now moving on to agenda item 4, which relates to our own strategic session that we had earlier in the year, as well as how those have fed into both the business planning as well as program aspects of the Secretariat's work. I want to preface this by saying we've distributed a number of documents. At least 2 of them are quite voluminous. One is an independent report by Mistra, which facilitated the strategy session over a day, and it makes very interesting reading. Second is the revised business plan following that strategy session, which hopefully you will also see has incorporated to a large extent the strategic conversations that we had as commissioners. And then finally, I want to hand over to the ED to take us through her presentation of how this all has come together into a program of work for the Secretariat. Thank you, Edie. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Chair. If I can get the slides for agenda item 4 up, please. Just a few slides to facilitate this discussion on strategic priorities. I see surprised faces from the AV guys. Secretariat, do they have the slides? Okay. Okay, I'll start talking in the interest of time whilst the team is getting that sorted. If I can get the pointer, Mr. DDG. Okay, so we had the strategy session, and I think it's important for me to preface this with this Priorities, yes, are set based on the outcomes of the discussions at the strategy session. However, this discussion is aimed to really probably give a nod on whether or not those issues are properly captured, but then to highlight glaring gaps that we might have missed in the process of consolidating this. And as you know, business planning is also a continued, an ongoing process. So adjustments can always be done. Look, now I'm controlling my laptop with this issue. Are you okay now? So what we began and what was raised from a contextual perspective was that the transition environment has in earnest changed over the 5 years that the Commission has been functioning. South Africa generally has established a very strong policy foundation, I think starting from the Climate Change Act, but through to a series of other policy instruments. We've seen the IRP come through. There's work now on the IEP, the industrial strategy process. So there's quite a number of policy instruments around decarbonization, climate resilience, and so on that's been put in place. So the foundation is there. And what was made very clear is that the challenge for us is no longer policy design, but rather implementation at scale. We've got policy instruments in place, and the key challenge is implementation. Okay, I'm here. The third key issue was the changing global geopolitical landscape. It's becoming more fragmented and more uncertain. So therefore, uncertainty has become the new normal, which then requires us to be agile in the way in which we do our work and accept that we are operating on shaky grounds. The fourth key issue was climate finance, which is remaining it remains quite insufficient and increasingly debt-based. But additional to that, the availability of climate finance is also the capacity to deploy the available resources, however limited they are, but the capacity to deploy them at scale and ensure that meaningful meaningful programs are implemented on the ground. Yes, climate risks are becoming or have really are increasingly becoming core economic and fiscal risk. No need for me to elaborate on that. We see with the multiple extreme weather conditions that we are facing and the damage that is caused. We also recognize that the greater risk for us is implementation failure and not policy failure. Therefore, success will depend on coordination, stronger coordination, accelerated execution, credible accountability mechanism, and also ability to mobilize resources. I'm not going to talk to the slide in detail, but it really highlights what the Commission pointed out as a strategic inflection point, where we're moving from climate leadership to climate delivery narrative. So strengthening our role as from thought leaders to implementation. Thought leadership still very important. We need to keep that, but then strengthen the implementation support part, but also driving coordination across government and across different sectors. Key strategic ambition that came out of that particular discussion was to evolve from being a respected voice in the transition to becoming a trusted platform that helps ensure the transition is delivered in earnest. Then we went on to look at what needs to happen for us to move from convening to driving accountability and delivery. It was probably repeated on a number of occasions why the PCC was established, which was very clear: to build consensus across different stakeholders, stakeholder groups, shape climate policy through the advisory and evidence-based work that we do, but then also guide South Africa's just transition. So that foundation has been laid with the various instruments, documents, advisory notes that have been produced over the past 5 years. So the change in emphasis was highlighted under 5 key priorities, which is to close the gap between policy and implementation, to mobilize and align climate finance, support local government as a front line of delivery, so bringing in the municipalities issue much strongly there, strengthening coordination across government, but not just government, across stakeholder groupings, and building accountability and tracking mechanisms that would translate recommendations into action. So as we transition into the Schedule 3 entity that we've just discussed, then the key question was where and how will influence be measured? Will it be on the quality of advice that we give or on contribution to measurable outcomes? We have seen those examples where advice would have been given on a number of key climate policy issues, but did all that advice translate into measurable outcomes? And that was the key question asked, which we would seek to answer in how we structure our priorities for the next 5 years. So those slides were mainly just a summary of what came out of the discussions. Most of it is captured in that report from that Mistra prepared for us. The priorities that are also captured in the full business plan that you've received and broken down into key actions for the next financial year at least. But for the 5 years, the impact statement for the PCC adjusted more to lean towards implementation support. So we said the impact is South Africa's climate response that translates policy commitments into actionable strategies that deliver measurable emissions reductions, strengthens resilience, and enables inclusive, evidence-based just transition, positioning the country on a credible path to net zero by 2050, which, by the way, is still very much the net zero by 2050 is a target that we all aspire towards. And for us to get there, we really need to work hard on not just developing pathways, but really providing the necessary implementation support. 5 key priorities. The 5th priority is a well-governed, accountable, and high-performing institution that then supports 4 substantive priorities, which the first leg talks to evidence-based and policy advisory. So that's the research work that we do. The second priority is around climate financing and implementation support. 3rd priority is consensus building and structured dialogue across key stakeholders. And the 4th priority is tracking and monitoring climate action and just transition. Then these have then been translated into key outcomes and outputs. How would we know that we've performed what we would have set out to do? No need for me to read through that slide. We will also take a discussion on whether or not the outputs then get us to where the Commission would like to be come year 5, come 2030. Would we, and looking back, would we say we've achieved what we've set out to do by seeing these outputs translating on the ground? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Edie, for that very succinct presentation. If you can, yes, thank you, Professor Field. Anyone else, please invert your name tag so I can see you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So I just want to push a little bit against the narrative that the policy, we're sort of done with the policy and now it's implementation. And the one area that I still feel is a bit of a gap, is a big gap actually, is loss and damage. Because we know that climate impacts are already manifesting. We know that that damage is being felt by communities across South Africa. And so I just want to be mindful that there's still a policy debate to be had about where that harm falls and who bears the cost.
Thank you, Commissioner Field. I thought Commissioner Brandon would put his name tag up, but maybe he needs a minute. Commissioner Errol.
There we go. I think it's up. Do you want to go first?
No, you go first. He snoozed, he loses.
All right. Thank you very much, Chair. So on our previous meeting, quarterly meeting, when we left, we were given these reports, the imbalance of power by Wife of the Call. They were shared with us. So I just want to get a sense of the recommendations that are here from civil society, were they taken into consideration? Because here it says the PCC, and going through this, and I'll quote from page 39 to 50, it speaks about the shortcomings that happened from the previous cohort. So I just want to get a sense, were these recommendations from civil society taken into consideration moving forward? And if not, maybe what were the challenges? Because we were handed over the books and the reports rather, and we saw them after. And are they going to be taken into consideration after this meeting? I just want to get a sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Errol. Commissioner Brandon.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. Just on this issue of still debating policy as well, and maybe good that the DDG is here for this as well, just on the sectoral emissions targets. So we had a sectoral emission target report come out for public comment for a period of time, but the essence of the sectoral emissions targets is really dividing up the carbon space, and where maybe certain sectors are in a way easier to abate, and the need to look at the social value of the carbon that is emitted. To me, that sounds like a perfect debate for the Commission. So I'm just wondering what the sort of next step with the sets are, and if there is potential for that debate to happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Brandon. Commissioner Gallant.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I'm concerned about this term just transition. We've got a goal of 2030. Come 2030, we can still speak about just transition. I'm concerned about what happens in between and how do we implement that, the mechanism about that. And I'm thinking about the labor force that needs to get us somewhere. And where is the labor force? We don't discuss that. And we need to train people to reach that goal at 2030. And I'm thinking of our youth who are very much unemployed and for whom we can create work to reach it, to reach that goal at 2030. So I just had in the week a meeting with the European Parliament in Cape Town, for example, and I asked them, listen, can you train our people to implement climate change, instruments to reach that goal? And there's certain arguments, for example, to say that we train people from Africa, but what happens to the people after they've been trained? They stay in Europe. So I would suggest that we bring people from countries who are very much advanced in these instruments and who can train our people in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gallant. Commissioner Mate, and then I'll hand back to ED as well as DDG to answer the questions.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Yeah, I think the summary of the priority presentation is well received. I know it's difficult to consider all priorities, but I think the synthesis of all the areas, I think it's well covered. I think if there are any gaps, it's something that can be addressed going forward. And I also think the shift away from focusing on policy development to implementation, I think that's well received. However, I've got two questions related to implementation. Implementation will happen through government departments. will happen, at the national level, will happen at the provincial level and local level. So how PCC is going to ensure that our recommendations and advice is actually taken seriously and implemented. So that's the first part. The second part, I also assume that some of the recommendations will be implemented through municipalities, because that's where the work is really happening. That's where the work should be happening. But we do know that some of the municipalities are challenged in terms of capacity, financially, and resources, and also other challenges, governance issues, etc. So how are we going to mitigate that as PCC? One strategy could be, for instance, that we look at municipalities that may be classified as functioning well, and then municipalities that are struggling, we put them in the back burner and consider them at a later stage, once we've actually tested the implementation model. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mate. ED, shall I hand over to you first and then to DDG?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Commissioner Field, the issue of policy, so we are not saying completely let it go. It's about the shift in emphasis, right? So, for example, the team that's doing research and policy advisory would need to focus more on, let's say, if we are going to go on to DFFE and say, but where are the NDC implementation pathways? Is there a gap in terms of getting the pathways developed? So we need to work on doing policy and advisory towards the implementation pathways themselves, and where there are gaps, for example, on loss and damage under the adaptation sector and all of that, that the team would have to identify, and we do the work, ensure that the advice is given. We've also identified the fact that we can't be providing advice that's going to float and not land somewhere. And this links on to, I think there was also another question from Commissioner Errol on recommendations and all of that. So we are, as part of supporting implementation, consciously now sitting on a one-on-one basis with all key DGs. So we've been doing that over the past 2 months to say, okay, where are you in this space? What's happening? And that's how we are able to identify key gaps that needs to be addressed, because we then we are very conscious to the fact that we act as a catalyst for implementation. And that touches on that part, Commissioner Mati. The PCC is not an implementing entity. There's in no way we're going to implement, but rather support implementation and be very conscious that whatever we do, and that's the question we ask ourselves as Secretariat, is so that what must happen? So if I'm going to go all the way and secure this particular research and procure service providers to produce a technical report on what? So for example, the recent discussion we are having with DTIC is around CBAM, right? What happens and how are we responding as a country to CBAM and all of that, and such that whatever recommendations come out of this process then arrives at an implementation point. So that's what we mean by emphasizing implementation. Commissioner Errol, I would like to put it on record that the book that you received on imbalance of power was not issued by the PCC and was not formally submitted to the PCC. So it was a commissioner that was sharing, a former commissioner that was generously sharing information with yourselves. I would just like to put it on record that it's not a PCC formally submitted kind of recommendation. But I do get that there are very valid issues raised there in terms of the power and the muscle that the PCC has and how it gets to implement certain things. So there would be certain things that are taken into consideration in terms of the approach we take in getting certain pieces of work done. So Chair, I'm going to really shy away from specifically dealing with sections of that book itself. I think the sector targets from Commissioner Brandon, the DDG will handle that part. The local government space, Commissioner Martin, I'm sure later on when we talk to the working group presentations on the climate finance and implementation support section, there's now deliberate work where we're dealing with individual municipalities. Obviously, not all of them identified based on priority pockets of work that needs to happen. So where we then assist and provide the capacity for implementation there. So it's more on a targeted basis. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Edie. Mr. Mabena has just pointed out that the question on just transition and jobs intake, he can provide from the DFFE point of view some clarity.
No, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, specifically, actually, the Climate Change Policy 2011 articulates two policy instruments on the just transition. This is the National Employment and Vulnerability Assessment, which basically advocates for assessment of people who are affected by the just transition, providing the social groupings within society. Then also the policy advocates for the development of the sector job resilience plan. Basically, this is the policy that support, the protection of livelihoods for communities affected by the transition. So what happens is that the department, DFFE, developed these two policy instruments, which were published in 2020. And then further to that, the department has actually on the ground a piloted implementation of those two policy instruments, specifically in Mpumalanga, where the department supported the training capacity building intake on communities, specifically in Mpumalanga. Currently, there is internal progress ongoing, where the department seeks to elevate, that work to support both skills, intake as well as, transition jobs from carbon intensive sectors to more sustainable form of livelihoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you. DDG, do you want to respond to the issue of input possibilities around either policies, or I would call it regulations that actually become part of overarching policy?
Yes, and I've got a short answer, and the answer is that actually the next step on the sets, once we've clarified the processes that I've mentioned, is precisely that, then to consult with everyone. So it's the next step.
Short and sweet, Commissioner Brandon. You'll hold the DDG to that commitment, yes? On our behalf, collective behalf. Commissioner Tandile.
Thank you. I do have some points I wanted to make regarding Minster's report. So I just wanted to check if this is this Q&A for this session is inclusive of that report, the business case report, or we're still coming to it, because then I can just reserve my questions for then.
If you have comments, hopefully not very strident ones, please feel free.
No promises. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank you, first of all, for your framing provocation, because it speaks exactly to what I wanted to highlight that was reflected in both the Minster report as well as the Climate Finance Working Group minutes. So I think maybe I can begin with an issue that has already been raised by Commissioner Mate about the municipal capacity and the revenue debt spiral that they are currently facing. So I wanted to highlight that precarious position that they're in and the eroding electricity sales revenue that they're experiencing. The questions that I have in my mind, which maybe we may not be able to answer in this space, that's okay, but for us to continue engaging with is, as many companies that are cross-subsidizing electricity for indigent households are turning to off-grid solutions, how we plan to address issues around the FBAE, and ensuring that they are adequately subsidized. So there was a presentation, I think the executive director spoke to some of the integrations that you guys are doing. There was a presentation that was made by, I believe it was someone from the JPMU in the engagement in Witbank a couple of weeks ago that was quite informative. So I'd like to request that for maybe all the commissioners that presentation be shared to give us sight of some of the finance mobilization that is being made to assist municipalities. And then with regards to, you will note as the executive director and chairperson, the email that I shared last night regarding the carbon tax, but I wanted to highlight something. I don't want to necessarily litigate that here, but I wanted to highlight something about the timeframes in which we are facing. So the European Union is in the works of discussing their multi-year financing framework for from 2028 to, I believe, 2035. And based on the current proposals, it sees a weakening of climate-specific earmarks, particularly Sub-Saharan Africa. It's something of importance to us. So it's looking like it might decrease from, I believe, 43% to 30%. So given the remarks that were made by Minister in the report around the grant versus debt bias, I'd like to ask maybe how we are planning to address this, if we are looking to lobby more strongly through the climate envoys that the PCC works with for a stronger commitment on climate finance, especially considering, as you framed already, the geopolitical tensions that we see and the inclination that many countries will have to shift towards domestic issues, particularly around security. And then I just wanted to flag as well that I thought was quite important is that Western Europe accounts for 71.2% of South Africa's international climate finance flows. So this could definitely be a huge issue for South Africa and our climate decarbonization plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Edie, I'm not sure if you want to respond. Oh, let's take Commissioner Zainab first, and then I will allow Edie to respond.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. A comment from me around our strategic priorities. Perhaps it's not possible to communicate that up front, but I feel what is missing is the restorative justice element. And I think it's about the heart of our work. I think the head and the hands is very clear in terms of how we structure our work, but how does the heart, how is that portrayed? So I feel that perhaps in the stakeholder engagement and dialogue, which the term is two ways, right? So how do we incorporate space for how communities, how South Africans are experiencing loss and damage, how we're experiencing the threats of climate change, and how we are dealing with scars on the land, but also scars on the communities. So how we can integrate that a bit more. And also, I find wording quite important. So as we create these public documents to emphasize society as well as economy, because in the Climate Change Act, it's very clear it's a low carbon and climate resilient economy and society. And I think we need to emphasize that. So that societal aspect, that community aspect, I feel needs to come across strongly in our communications, but also our priorities and how we implement. So just a reminder, I know everything can't be spelled out in detail, but a reminder that that heart space needs to really show through in our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zainab. Edie, do you want to respond to those comments and questions?
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick comment on the last one by Commissioner Zainab. on restorative justice, perhaps the devil is in the detail in terms of what we mean by consensus building, social compacting, awareness and all of that. And I guess in the planned initiation of the working group on that family of work needs to proceed in earnest so that we ensure that we cover those things sufficiently. I'm quite sure Blessing has taken notes on that one. I'm starting with the easy ones because Commissioner Zonke, my goodness, shot from the hip. Then the Commissioner Zonke, the issue of the issue of grant versus debt bias that we see, it remains and it will remain, and we are foreseeing a situation where concessional finance is going to come through more and more than grant financing. And grant financing, as it comes, it's mainly for technical assistance or policy support and all that, rather than tangible implementation on the ground. I guess we need to turn the conversation around in terms of how do we ensure that we've got institutions that can absorb such capital. So strengthening our institutions and ensuring that we've got bankable projects that are systematically developed in the form of, I think this is central to the discussion around country platforms. How do we inform what needs to be done and how we are going to then stack different sources of funds, which the Deputy Chair talks more eloquently about that subject than me, but very important. And you are correct, the funding pool is going to reduce, and we are not blaming anyone for it. We're just blaming the current conditions. Therefore, that's why we are turning most of the discussions domestically, because we really believe that there is quite a significant amount of capital within the country that we can leverage on for climate action. It's just a matter of how we define it and how we package it and how we stack different initiatives to access those funds. Yes, we will request the circulation of the presentation that you've requested for. Devin has taken a note, and we'll ask the organizers of that meeting to then provide. On the first part of your contribution around grid access, subsidized electricity and how we deal with different components, Deputy Chair, if you allow me, later this afternoon, we've got a detailed discussion on grid. And maybe that discussion can really resurface during that session. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other Commissioner Sarushan?
Thanks, Deputy Chair. I was reading through the business plan, and it was nice to see that the PCC was actually born out of the 2018 Job Summit, right? And I'd like us to just remember that, when we look at the strategic priorities and as we move into implementation, we must keep that focus also on economic growth and job creation, because since that 2018 Job Summit, where South Africa's unemployment was 27%, we're now sitting at 32%, 60% youth unemployment. And while we look at all the NDC targets, we must hold that hand in hand with the economic development targets, how we are facilitating job creation, enabling that just transition. And I would suggest that we add some kind of economic metric or job metric to the targets that we then track and monitor when we look at the programs that we drive.
Thank you, Commissioner Sarushan. Commissioner Zonke?
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for your contribution. It just prompted a reminder. I believe, was it in the Executive Director's report, you'd mentioned a report that they'd commissioned UCT to conduct regarding economic complexity. Yes. I think with that note, I second the contribution made by Commissioner Sarushan that I believe during COVID, there was the NetScram that was released, something along the lines of a national income dynamic assessment to really weed out or understand the discrepancies that we're going to see in terms of income as a result of decarbonization might also be helpful as just a base case for us as well. Thank you.
Edie, you take those comments as noted. Okay, Commissioner Errol.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take advantage of the TFFE being here. I just want to find out the progress on the CCRF, the Climate Change Response Fund, because it's not listed as one of the priorities. So, yeah, just want to follow up on that. Thank you.
If there are no other comments or questions, DDG, you comfortable responding to that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I think it's a fair question since this was the initial work was done by PCC and TFFE with some colleagues from National Treasury. So where we are on that is that the National Treasury has sent us to the drawing board. So we are just doing, they've asked us to do the scenarios work, right? So it's, yeah, I guess National Treasury is wary of creating new funds and all that. So we've basically restarted the entire process, starting with this feasibility study. So where we are, we just in a process of trying to procure somebody who would do that feasibility work, and then we'll submit back to them and they'll come back to us. So it's nowhere near where we thought it would be when we're doing the job with the PCC at all. But we are in the hands of the National Treasury, and the correct status is that we are in a process of procurement to do the feasibility study. Thanks.
Thank you for that honest appraisal, TDG. If there are no further comments, should we take a short body break at this point? I can see even I am squirming in my seat right now.
Yeah.
So if we can make it 10 minutes and then we're back, we're still doing reasonably well for time. So yeah, 10 minutes and then let's reconvene. Thank you. Oh, Edie has just told me that it is in fact the tea break on the agenda, which I failed to see thanks to my eyesight issues. And DDG Kekana, if you need a referral to an optometrist, I'm very happy to give you one. Thank you, colleagues. Let's settle down. I've been told there's a monitor in the in the crowd somewhere who's going to report to the ED as it relates to whether our performance manage correctly the commission meetings or not. And apparently I can be marked down. Thank you very, very much. I think we've had a very fruitful, productive, and informative morning. We've covered a lot. We're now in that part of the agenda where really the commissioner voices come to the fore. And this is in the form of chairs of the working group reporting back on their activities since the last commission meeting. I do have a special request, if you will also indulge me in accommodating it. Shamini needs to leave soon to engage on a very delicate matter, not personal, professional. And I have concurred that it's important enough to slightly rearrange the agenda and let Climate Finance and Innovation Working Group go first. If you'll concur with me, if we can accommodate Shamini, that will be greatly appreciated. Very good, Shamini. Oh, and I just wanted to say, I've read through all the minutes, and they are very, very long, detailed minutes. We appreciate that, especially for the record and referencing back to them in the event that it's necessary. But from the working group chairs, I do require very short, succinct reports rather than reading out 20 pages. So if I can please implore you to stick to the main points, but very importantly, pull out action points, any decisions you want the Commission to consider at this meeting, as well as a forward-looking, perhaps, narrative of where you see your work going to, and of course, the linkages between your working group and other working groups. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Deputy Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. I see it's after 12 already. Just a quick brief update on the Climate Finance and Innovation Working Group. We had a meeting on the 5th of June. And I think just to echo what the ED said earlier, the working group is now transitioning from planning into implementation. And we have a strong pipeline of work that is now actively underway. Many of the initiatives we are executing on builds on the previous Commission's work activities. And at the same time, we have reaffirmed two critical priorities. The first thing is to maintain strategic focus on core priorities, and that being climate finance mobilization, green industrialization, adaptation finance, technology, and the just transition. So that remains core to what we're doing. We are also looking to retain flexibility within the working group in terms of our agenda and work program, largely because of the changing, evolving context within which we operate. And we are looking particularly at opportunities around carbon markets and global policy shifts, which has now entered the fore as well. I think then just in terms of progress across the key work streams, the first one, and a lot of this has been shared by the ED during the ED's report, but I'll go in a little bit more detail. The first one is strengthening the climate finance evidence base. This is specifically the Climate Finance Landscape Report, which remains a flagship initiative of this working group. This phase will expand participation across the financial sector, specifically in terms of that methodology that we are putting in place. We are also looking to improve data quality and analytical depth, and we are also looking to strengthen understanding of developmental and just transition outcomes. As was mentioned, this work is in partnership and funded by the IFC. I'd like to now move on to the next piece of work, which is the JARUP, or Advancing Adaptation Finance. And here we are moving from alignment into implementation and costing. The initial focus area will be on the built environment, water, and agriculture. And where we stand at the moment is that procurement is underway with a draft expected in the coming months. This remains a critical step towards translating adaptation priorities into investable programs. And I think that was a key issue that was raised by the commissioners earlier on. Then we've got the third work stream, which is the Just Transition Finance Mechanism. And here we are looking at building investable pipelines. Progress continues under the IKI-funded mechanism, which is housed at the DBSA. The PCC's role is increasingly focused now on developing bankable project pipelines, supporting socially owned renewable energy models, and strengthening stakeholder engagement and communication. The fourth area focuses on enabling systems and institutional capacity. There are two important system-level interventions that we are progressing. The first one being early warning systems, which is effectively moving towards a coordinated national approach, including community-level integration. The second one, which you did hear a little bit about, again from the ED's report, the climate budget tagging. And this is advancing with National Treasury to improve tracking and alignment of climate-related expenditure. Quite an important piece of work. And then we've got the fifth work stream, which is on driving green industrialization and innovation. And this is specifically the innovation part. The Green Technology Program is also now shifting from audit to application. And we are identifying technologies that support industrialization. And we are linking these technologies again to the financing opportunities. And so you can see the two components of the working group now coming together. This includes emerging proposals such as the solar furnace feasibility work, which was presented by the CSIR on the day. And like I mentioned, we are looking to now also do a bit of understanding of the carbon markets and looking at global pressures. And significant engagement is underway on carbon markets, specifically under Article 6, as well as the CBAM-related work program, and looking at our policy responses in that regard and what some of the mitigation actions could be. So the key issues identified include regulatory uncertainty, market infrastructure gaps, and limited liquidity. Importantly, commissioners emphasize that in relation to carbon markets, we must maintain environmental integrity and credibility, and this was put down as a key principle. We also said we must be willing to focus on real emission reductions and community benefits, which really speaks to the social angle and bringing that in. And that carbon markets should be complementary, not a substitute for decarbonization. And I think that's quite critical in terms of how we define net zero and what that means in terms of the IPCC and all of the work around the net zero pathways. So encouragingly, innovation is emerging, including DBSA instruments such as a carbon repo facility and a carbon credit backed bond, which was very interesting. We got some feedback on that, and it's definitely something for us to get more information on. I really implore you to have a look at those slides. Very interesting work, what our local institutions are doing around these different areas. And it speaks to Commissioner Zonke's input about what we can do around climate financing and how we're looking at opportunities in terms of domestic climate financing. So definitely our banks are stepping up. In terms of then some of the insights that were gained overall, I think the key message from the commissioners is that these initiatives cannot be viewed in isolation, something that came through quite strongly. And we saw that also mentioned in the first term with the commissioners as well, that it wasn't very clear as to how the different programs work together. And we need to start getting better at joining the dots and bringing the different pieces of work together such that we are driving towards a common goal, particularly in terms of the working group, but also all the working groups together and how it then speaks to the PCC strategy. So what commissioners indicated is that we must clearly demonstrate how each intervention contributes to finance mobilization at scale, green industrialization, and then ultimately the objective of a just transition, which is a key imperative of the PCC. The integrated view is essential to show collective impact and strategic coherence. And that was something that came through quite strongly from the commissioners. And so for the working group and how we're going to be looking at how we do this, we will be linking all of the work programs under a core priority and deliverable, which is ultimately the strategy for the working group that speaks to the PCC strategy. So In closing, I can say the working group is making steady and tangible progress across a broad portfolio, with increasing focus on implementation, pipeline development, adaptation finance, and emerging financial mechanisms. And for us, the overall objective remains unchanged. It remains that we want to mobilize finance at scale in support of South Africa's climate goals, economic development, and a just transition. And I think that was echoed very strongly throughout the day thus far. So just to end there, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shamini. I'll open up for any questions or comments. If not, I'll take the Commissioner Kungeka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought the chair of the working group presented a very comprehensive and strategically articulated report. And I want to thank you for that. I think, Chair, the main thing is also for the working group to think a little bit more around how will we measure success? In other words, what are these key indicators of success and at which milestones? Because as you can imagine, we can't say we're going to deliver finance at the end of the term. We need it as yesterday. So maybe we need to think a little bit about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted, yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you, Shamini. You can stay for as long as you can and then slip out. You are, oh, sorry. Commissioner Tandile, yeah.
Thank you for recognizing me, Chair. And thank you so much, Commissioner Harrington, for that very comprehensive overview. It sounds like really exciting work. And this is my formal petition to join the group, please. And what I wanted to speak about, I wanted to ask about, I think you've mentioned the focus on infrastructure and water. I think I'd seen in a previous presentation, DBSA mentioned, is that work that they're funding? And then I wanted to ask about green industrialization. Yeah, very exciting work, and I'd love to be more involved in that process. I had raised this, I believe, in the Net Zero Working Group, but maybe perhaps we could propose tabling the the SADC protocol on industry in that space, or in this platform, if it's the more appropriate one, for all the commissioners to have sight of that protocol, as it basically proposes pooling of resources across the SADC region that would support green industrialization in the region. So I think it's a very important document which South Africa has not signed on to as of yet, that we should be putting our weight behind. Thank you.
Noted, yeah, good, thank you. I'm so tempted to also weigh in for obvious reasons. Shamini, no, I'm not going to. I'm now, I like using the word agnostic. Good, sorry, I disabled myself there. We're going to return back to the agenda. Commissioner Brandon, Adaptation and Resilience Working Group.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So the working group reflected on the Commissioner's strategic session, which we also covered earlier today, and reaffirmed the importance of positioning adaptation as a national priority. Discussions focused on strengthening local implementation, adaptation finance, early warning systems, resilience measurement and governance, while also ensuring that adaptation is integrated into the broader just transition agenda. Commissioners emphasized the need for adaptation initiatives to contribute to broader resilience outcomes and long-term strategic objectives. So just really filtering adaptation into all the places that's appropriate. Specifically, we got updates, a very interesting session with the International Climate Council's network. So we had a Global North input from the UK and then Global South from Nigeria. And for me, that could have gone on for hours longer, because it really started tackling issues like the political will to follow recommendations and obstructions and difficulties and that kind of thing. And then also a very interesting session for DFFE. Mikateko came and spoke to us for a nice 40 minutes, talking about the implementation of adaptation provisions under the Climate Change Act. Sectoral vulnerability assessments were covered, as well as technical guidelines for municipalities, needs assessments, and response plans. So obviously where there really isn't a lot of support needed. Then a deep dive into the Just Adaptation and Resilience Investment Platform. You're going to hear it called JARP a lot of the time. Preparation for the next State of Climate Action Report, PCC adaptation work streams, including early warning systems, and commissioners were satisfied that sort of ground level early warning systems, such as community-based early warning systems that are used in Durban, for example, are in there as well. So it's not just a high level sort of high tech, high finance situation, but goes all the way down to the ground. And then the Secretariat's Emerging Resilience Framework, which is intended to improve strategic coherence across adaptation initiatives. So really just taking this sort of strategic pillars that we saw the ED present and making sure that there's a linkage between those and the work streams and the actual projects on the ground, so that we're not ending up focusing on just projects without knowing where it links into the strategy. Adaptation, implementation, and local government support very much highlighted at provincial and municipal level as a critical priority. Members emphasized the need to move beyond vulnerability assessments towards practical implementation support, capacity building, and access to finance for municipalities. Stronger collaboration between DFFE, SALGA, and other institutions was encouraged. And I think that's something we need to work on all the time and really sort of break down those silos as much as possible. Adaptation finance, of course, and investment mobilization focused on the working group reaffirming the importance of developing practical mechanisms to unlock adaptation finance. While supportive of JARP, commissioners highlighted the need to ensure that governance arrangements, investment pipelines, and access pathways are credible, implementable, and responsive to local government realities. The next phase of JARP development will be critical in translating the concept into an operational investment platform. And here we can see something that crosses a few different working groups. We just heard the climate finance angle of it as well. Emerging risks and opportunities, strategic alignment and coordination. So again, making sure that adaptation efforts are not fragmented and project-driven without a clear strategic framework. Implementation challenges. While adaptation activity is increasing across institutions, there is a risk of duplication, inefficiencies, and uneven implementation, which underscores the need for improved coordination and clearer institutional roles. Climate finance, climate risk financing also coming onto the agenda. Insurance and reinsurance risks are emerging as an important strategic issue, presenting an opportunity for the Commission to explore resilience financing and risk-sharing solutions with the financial sector. We know that as impacts happen, eventually we're going to be stuck with massive bills. And then Climate Change Act opportunities. So the implementation of the Act creating a significant opportunity for the PCC to influence national adaptation planning, resilience measurement, and climate governance, including through the State of Climate Action Report, as well as adaptation indicators work that's being done. The working group just wants the broader Commission to be aware and provide guidance at the right time and right place around the strategic framing of the adaptation work, how best to strengthen alignment between the Commission's strategic priorities, the working group's programs, and then the project level implementation. The architecture of the adaptation finance, so the Commission's role in shaping national adaptation finance arrangements, including the future development of the JARP, and its relationship to broader climate finance mechanisms. There's talk of possibly integrating the adaptation and mitigation side and realizing efficiencies there. And then local government's resilience and implementation support, just being very clear on priority areas where the PCC can add value in supporting municipalities to move from climate risk assessments to implementation and investment. And I leave it there, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Brandon. Commissioner, any questions or comments? I've just got one very quick one. The point that I made before Shamini presented her report was the interlinkages between working groups. And if you look at adaptation and resilience, while there might be a qualitative approach to all of society's well-being, The proof of the pudding is in the raising of the finances and resources that are required. I just want to be reasonably assured that as you look at the Just Adaptation and Resilience Investment Plan from different focal points, that there is someone paying attention to them at the right moment, being integrated, at the very least aligned.
Yeah.
Good. If there are no other comments, we'll take that report, Commissioner Brandon, as noted and put into the record. The next report is from the Net Zero and Employment Strategy Working Group. Joanne Yawich, who is the chair of that working group, is away and has extended her apologies. I think Commissioner Boitumelo is going to be doing the chairperson's report from that working group. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Chair. This report is obviously for noting from the Net Zero Work Group. So the working group met on the 4th of June and considered progress across the mitigation and institutional support programs. Alongside this, there was a strategic initiative discussion on the Code of Good Practice on Just Transition, as well as the Komati socially owned renewable energy project. So these just basically were reflected in the discussions in the meeting. I'll start with speaking to one aspect of the working group, which is the mitigation program. So we received an update on the mitigation program's modeling, research, and policy support work, with key areas in terms of new energy vehicle position paper, preparation for the forthcoming grid study, as well as work on industrial strategy and economic development pathways. Alongside this, electricity system planning, transmission infrastructure, and support to government policy processes. This is a continuous program, and it was important in highlighting the role between policymakers, researchers, as well as practitioners, with active collaboration underway with the Treasury, the Department of Transport, as well as the DFFE. There are a few priority areas that will be included in the next quarter. Commissioners basically broadly welcomed this program as evidence-based approach and highlighted several strategic issues requiring ongoing attention on this thematic area. On the Code of Good Practice, there was a focus on the draft of the Code of Good Practice that was shared with the Commission through the Secretariat. The Code of Good Practice basically intends to operationalize the principles that are contained in the PCC Just Transition Framework. The code seeks to provide practical guidance to employers, workers, as well as organized labor broadly and government on how to manage climate-related economic transitions in a fair and inclusive manner. I think it's very important coming from Labour to also say that we support this Code of Good Practice, as it speaks to a lot of issues that organized labor have spoken to in terms of what the just transition should look like, highlighting issues of social dialogue and stakeholder participation, consultation requirements during the transition period, labor market interventions and worker support measures, skills development, counseling and job placement services, adaptation-related workplace risks and occupational health considerations, as well as mechanisms to advance procedural, distributive, and restorative justice in the just transition. The working group broadly agreed that the Code of Good Practice draft should be circulated, which was done, and for commissioners to climatize themselves with this Code of Good Practice so that we're able to take it forward. We also indicated that a climate investment fund program around coal transitions is warranted, and that an explicit mention of this is important, as it represents a significant milestone in the moving from just transition principles to practical implementation guidance. In terms of moving from policy to implementation, we received an update on the institutional support program, which has increasingly shifted towards project pipeline development and implementation support. The program focuses on socially owned renewable energy, partnership implementation models, as well as practical just transition delivery mechanisms. There are key areas that are included that I think the commissioners can go through in the broader report. It's just positively indicating the outcomes through employment creation, economic diversification initiatives, green entrepreneurship support, agriculture projects, as well as community development interventions. On the Komati socially owned renewable energy project, we received a progress report on the Komati work, which includes a feasibility study. This is one of the emerging reports in South Africa and most advanced community-owned renewable energy projects. The initiative has been developed in partnership with the World Bank, the Nelson Mandela University, and community stakeholders. There are quite a number of key findings from this feasibility studies that colleagues can go through, but they just broadly include the identification of preferred ownership models, where we're combining community and worker ownership, trusts, and development partnerships. We're also wanting to indicate that it's important to have strong examples of socially owned renewable energy under development in South Africa, and indicate that this has potential to provide lessons for future transitions and redevelopment. On strategic issues that were emerging from this work, there were several broader strategic issues that emerged and may require the Commission's attention over the coming quarters. This includes Eskom decommissioning, development of related Carbon Tax Act and carbon pricing policy, the need for stronger mechanisms to enable commissioners to engage on an urgent and emerging issue between quarterly meetings, improved integrated PCC work streams, particularly between mitigation, adaptation, industrial development, and place-based just transition implementation, as well as the importance of moving beyond research and policy advice towards implementation-ready projects, investment pipelines, and demonstrating transition outcomes. So basically, Deputy Chair, this is work that is ongoing and very practical. And I think the colleagues that are working on this work are here. If there are any other operational questions that may arise, they'd be happy to respond to that. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Boitumelo. I'll take questions or comments on that report. And before I do that, I urge Commissioner Moya, welcome. We did receive your apology for the early session, and we're very pleased to have you here with us for the second part of the session. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much to the chairpersons that have presented. This is really exciting work. I think on the side of what Boitumelo has been presenting on, my interest is, and I'm speaking from the challenges that we are experiencing as we try to make sense of this as local government, and we struggle, for instance, with projects preparation, for instance, and it speaks to either the absence of capacity or misalignment of the skills that we have and the work that needs to happen. I think, Chair, it's more to you to say, what is our relationship? I'm not sure if the sector that is higher education is represented here in the commission, but what is the relationship we have with higher education sector? Because I think there's a conversation that we are having at our, like in our own spaces. For instance, I'm having the conversations with the VCs in Tshwane about Tshwane. But for cities that don't have the benefit of getting that kind of support that I'm getting, I do believe that when we talk employment, and I don't know much about the work that you have been doing, but I think we can benefit from just understanding what is the discussion at their level and whether we are talking about the same things as well. So that's more to you, Chair, than Boitumelo. Thank you so much for the presentations.
Thank you. And I'm going to deflect Mayor to the Executive Director particularly given the large amount of work that we're doing. I would imagine cross-cutting across working groups in skills development as well as finding new ways of either reskilling workers who might be negatively impacted by the transition, but more importantly, as we prepare for what we think are going to be green industrial opportunities. And then to the point that you're making at local government level, particularly the large metropolitan areas where I think there is a sufficient scale, if we get the institutional skills as well as potential funding arrangements right, there's a lot that can be done. I mean, that would be my contribution. And I'd also draw attention to a project that the previous Climate Finance and Innovation Secretariat member coordinated, taking a sample of 10 municipalities of various types, metros, secondary cities, as well as what we could call difficult towns, and did an in-depth analysis of what the issues are. And I think that makes very interesting reading. It does have some recommendations, but what it does do is gives a very clear diagnostic of what the problems are. So, Edie, if we can also make that report, which was very comprehensive, available to either all commissioners or commissioners who are interested.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Chair. We will certainly do so. But then also happy to report that that foundational work forms part of what the JET PMU is working on in terms of municipal capacity, JET municipal capacity. They are implementing recommendations from that piece of work that that was done. So we will certainly circulate that. And Commissioner Moya, on the higher education sector, I do agree with you that we probably need to improve engagements, but engagements have been happening on a number of ways. Firstly, we serve on the Minister's JET Skills Advisory Forum. I believe myself, even Commissioner Boitumelo, is part of that advisory forum, but obviously it is mainly limited at just energy transition. However, we need a more balanced approach in terms of dealing with institutions, either singularly or collectively. But we do have agreements and working arrangements with different universities based on the skills that they possess, the different research units that they have on different pockets of work that we do. But there's this component that you're talking about in terms of skills development, deliberate skills development for climate action and just transition. So we're really taking note and would see how we somehow improve on that, that deliverable. Before those 2 points were raised, I also wanted to comment on the report of the working group and maybe something that needs a bit of reflection by commissioners on, number one, the Code of Good Practice as reported is now in the NEDLAC processes. The working group looked at it. There's still a discussion to be had on where it's going to land and how, and it would be interesting to get views of commissioners, whether or not it should remain a voluntary instrument or a legally enforceable instrument. Therefore, if it becomes a legally enforceable instrument, the engagements that need to proceed then with key government entities, in this case, the Department of Labor and all that, to then see how it lands such that it's impactful. We, the chair of the working group also, the acting chair, also noted the Komati issue. We are not formally tabling the continued work at Komati, but yes, she tabled it in terms of the implementation support that's happening there. But over and above that, would be great to get reflections in relation to one of the strategic issues that she raises is around the Eskom decommissioning process or schedule, how we then going to position the work that we do in ensuring that the learnings out of Komati get replicated into other regions where decommissioning is going to occur. But then how do we continue to impactfully apply ourselves within Komati itself as the PCC, that still remains a key issue, you know, a solve for X issue for us. And hopefully in the next commission meeting, we will have a more substantive discussion on that. But initial thoughts, Chair, might be useful to the team. Thank you.
Thank you, E.G. Commissioner Catherine, did you have your hand up? No. Commissioner Shamila, you looked edgy on your seat and wanted to say something. Other than to recognize, I think, that the work that the NBI does through their CEOs Champions Forum to ensure that the private sector itself at a corporate level is not let off the hook as it relates to their broader skills development and expansion commitment beyond just their own corporate needs, if I'm paraphrasing correctly.
Thank you, Vice Chair. So that's correct. And I think it's premised off the understanding that we need to work so that the public sector is not left behind. So the NBI is obviously developing that off the back of the experience they've had working with the TVET system over a number of years in particular, and on the notion of demand-led skilling broadly. And so the two components, I mean, the one is just that bringing up the technical skills in the country is critical and working on demand-led skilling, but also underpinning all of that, the sense that we need agile skills, including in parallel developing entrepreneurial skills, noting that I think that the private sector is not going to be the biggest uptaker of all of those. And so the meaningful earning opportunities is actually the bigger conversation that we need to have alongside that, and creating those as part of it. So thank you, Vice Chair, for that. But of course, then the immediate focus on the Just Transition Skilling for Employment, which is the name of that program in particular, is looking at where there's indications of pipeline already for the different projects, and then developing the tools for the modeling around what skills will be needed where, right down to municipal level, and then the implications for that on things like skills development zones that we can immediately start to put effort into. So we've got the best opportunity for the skills to be developed in the country, and, you know, and avoid, for example, importation where we can develop in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If there aren't further, Commissioner Brandon? Oh, yes. Okay.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. I just want to expand a little bit on the decommissioning discussion that happened there as well. And this is more from the angle of greenhouse gas emissions reduction rather than the just transition work that's happening at Komati and other places. At this point in time, no one really knows what the decommissioning schedule is. We're actually engaged in litigation around that. There's the IRP 2019, which has got certain dates and so on. And then we're also having the sort of head of Eskom generation, for example, speak off the cuff about much later dates. We're seeing coal purchasing agreements being entered into, which technically subsist for 10 years longer than the power station should be operating. And I think it's causing a lot of confusion, and it compromises sort of reduction trajectory work that the Commission's involved in. So perhaps it's an idea to invite Eskom here at some point in time to explain where they're at.
Thank you. Noted. We've done that in the past where we've invited the chief executive, and in this case, probably the head of generation, to come and explain to us what movement, if any, has occurred since our last understanding of the decommissioning schedule, driven by what factors. I would want it to be a collegial and perhaps frank and Chatham House driven session, but we need to create a safe space where at the very least we understand what's going on. So I agree with that. Good. If there are no further questions, Commissioner Tandile.
Thank you. I wanted to raise an issue that we highlighted in the adaptation working group in the previous sessions. We highlighted the need for a baseline health assessment for populations, particularly in the coal belt. I just wanted to escalate it in this platform because I understand that while we may ask for that, the Commission may not have the resources to conduct something like that. So I wanted to bring to the Commission's attention that the South the South African Demographic Health Survey is currently underway. It started in February and they are going to be going on until August. So I think it may be in the interest of the commission to connect with them in ensuring that in their methodology that they're embedding the risks of climate disaster risk and emissions as well. So yeah, I think time is of the essence, as well as our next census is scheduled for 2032. And yeah, it would be the best time to really capitalize on this. And then just to close, I think it would be really integral to also although it was raised in the adaptation group, integral to the monitoring and evaluation group in terms of monitoring as we decommission how people's health improves. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Tandile. Very, very important input. Commissioner Mate.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I just want to comment on the request for input from commissioners around the code of good practice. What is our thinking? I don't think it should be just a document that, it's optional. Somehow we must find a way of making it mandatory. And I don't know what will be after the NETLAC process, what's going to happen after that. But my recommendation will be to approach perhaps the Department of Employment and Labor for as a lead department, especially on the people that are going to be affected by the transition, and then also to approach National Treasury. So to find a way of linking it to funding, so it becomes a condition as part of, especially if the government is going to provide guarantees for some of these projects, that we put it as a condition as South Africa, that these are the requirements, so that people are not worse off after the transition. But I don't know what will be the process to be followed beyond just the NETLAC process. But I think that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think in principle, I see nods around the room. That note, the good conduct and practice note, was distributed late for information. I suggest that we allocate that to one of the working groups. I would imagine it would be net zero and employment, to come back to the commission with a clear recommendation with respect to what the PCC's orientation and position would be with respect to the standing and strength of that good practice note, beyond just being an advisory document emanating from the social partnering process at NETLAC. So I would be very happy for the working group to apply its mind to that issue. And as it relates, Commissioner Mate, to implications that might be of a fiscal financial nature, it could also be implications of a corporate financial nature over and above what the Industrial Relations Act might say, but to apply then mind in the working group to those issues in bringing it forward as a well thought through recommendation to the PCC. I would support that. Good. Moving on then to monitoring and evaluation working group, Dr. Ntombifuthi Khumalo.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Good afternoon to yourself, commissioners, and everyone attending the meeting. On the 3rd of June, the Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group met and had a meeting and focused primarily on strengthening the Commission's role in monitoring, accountability, and assessment under the Climate Change Action. And the working group expressed a strong support for positioning the PCC in South Africa's leading climate accountability, with a mandate beyond reporting compliance, but to assess the impacts and enabling accountability, supporting also cost correction and informing evidence-based decision-making. And so in the meeting, 4 agenda items were tabled and discussed by the commissioners. The first 2 key areas of discussion were the development of a PCC's 2 flagship reporting products, the biennial climate response report and the national state of climate change assessment. So the biennial climate response report, the first one will be in 2027,
and the report intends to serve as a national implementation, accountability, and progress tracking mechanism. The report also would assess climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, climate finance, governance, and the just transition outcome. And the second report, which is the National State of Climate Change Assessment, the first one will be in 2030, and the report would adopt an economy-wide systems perspective and assess climate risks, emission trajectories, adaptation, resilience outcomes, and also finance flows, governance arrangement, and institutional readiness. And then the working group also in reporting those two flagship products, the commissioners emphasized the importance of actually having a scientific credibility and independence review so that these reports become recognized nationally, instruments for tracking climate action and implementation progress and the transition outcomes. The third agenda item was the Just Transition Indicator Framework, and the working group received an update on that. And that focus on developing and integrating just transition indicators into government planning, monitoring, and reporting system. And this work arose from engagements with the Department of Planning and Monitoring and Evaluation. And so the commissioners discussed and also supported this pragmatic approach that focuses on embedding indicators, the relevant indicators within the departmental mandates, while strengthening the overall measurements of just transition outcomes. And the fourth agenda item that was tabled was the review of the 2024 State of the Climate Action Report. And in reviewing the findings of the State of the Climate Action Report, the working group noted that South Africa continues to demonstrate strong climate policy ambition, but implementation challenges still remain significant. And particular attention was drawn to institutional capacity constraints, policy coherence, climate finance, mobilization, and the implementation challenges facing the local government. So the commissioners further emphasized the need for future assessment to place greater focus on adaptation and resilience, health impacts, local government performance, and vulnerable communities, and also the socio-economic outcomes. And I think Commissioner Pillay did indicate that we need an economy matrix into the monitoring and evaluation, and that was also an input from the commissioners in regards to the climate action report, and also the lived experiences of South Africans as climate impact intensifies. So Deputy Chair, overall, the working group endorsed the strategic direction of the PCC's monitoring and evaluation program and highlighted the importance of developing a credible national climate measurement, accountability and assessment architecture that strengthens transparency, learning, coordination, and implementation across the climate response systems. And so in conclusion, the working group will continue refining the indicator framework, reporting on methodologies, governance arrangements, and resourcing requirements. And we'll also report back to the Commission on these processes advance. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, take any questions and Yuri will help me with any operational.
Thank you, Dr. Nthombwe. Any questions or comments, particularly from other working group chairs who might have an interest in the work that they're doing, featuring in an integrated but also in a focused way in both the reports? So I'll be happy to take comments This needs to be a comprehensive statement of our, essentially, how well are we doing on a biennial basis and then on an annual basis, and therefore needs to find a scientific methodological way of integrating all of our perspectives with commentary answered by the question, how well or not so well are we doing? Commissioner Martin?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I just want to make sure that what I'm hearing is what the work group is going to be working on. Are we saying the work group will come back in their next feedback and give us a scorecard that will not only look at the climate change targets and measures, but will also look at the economic growth, look at job creation, etc., going forward? Is that what we're saying, so that we're more progressive in terms of going forward? Which would be great, by the way. I think everyone is actually asking for this. How do you balance the climate change targets versus the challenges that the country is faced with? The economic growth, job creation, poverty, blah, 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 blah. Thank you.
Yeah. Commissioner Khumalo or another member of the Secretariat?
Chair, I will start off and then I'll hand on over to Yuri. As highlighted, Commissioner Mate, the commissioners did indicate that yes, the socio-economic should be part of the just transition framework, because we thought that was critical to be into the framework as well. I think Yuri will take over from there. You can assist me there. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Commissioner. The report will essentially look at how the country is faring in terms of climate action against its promised deliverables internationally, domestically. It'll look at mitigation, adaptation, and resilience building. And then it will look at particular sectors that are impacted especially hard by climate change. We are still discussing whether the report will include a health section. It's likely that it will. So that will look at the cost of healthcare to the public healthcare system and to the public. And then there will be a section on just transition stories, and that will be the lived experience of people who are experiencing the just transition, but also impacted by industry and fossil fuels. And then there will be a contextual section, which will look at socio-economic issues in the country, what's hindering climate action, what's assisting climate action. And a major part of the report will be a perception survey, which will be the second statistically representative survey in the country, which will look at views on climate change and the just transition in the country. Thanks.
Good. Any other comments? I think we're at IDEM that this is very much needed, especially if we establish a methodological rigor and baseline and then judge progress on that basis year on year or every 2 years. Commissioner Kungeka?
Thank you very much. I've got just perhaps a comment or even like a suggestion. When Commissioner Brandon gave his report on the ICCN contributions at the adaptation, he meant one of the things that came out from that conversation, at least it's a question I asked, I think some of the representatives, how they measure the effectiveness of the commission of the advisory committees, which is slightly different from what the M&E work is about. And this, for me, is an issue because the advisory and the recommendations we make, we always have to find a way of tracking whether that's landing somewhere and all of that. And I'm wondering, how do we treat that question of the effectiveness of the recommendations of our work measured by the proxy being the recommendations we make and how those are taken up? If we could just have a little bit of a conversation around that. Then the last part, or rather the last comment, is relating to just overall the reports given. I think they were very comprehensive work being done. It's really good progress being made. What is not clear to me is that at the end of 2026, 27, do we have any sort of idea of what type of recommendations will be coming out of their various pieces of work? And I'm not sure how that process of formulating and advancing those recommendations for advisory purposes to government typically works. I think I would be interested to see how that works. I'm interested to see how that works. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll let the ED answer that. If there's anything embedded in the current year with respect to deliverables, Mayor Moya.
Thank you again, Deputy Chair, for the opportunity. I think I got inspired by the emphasis on implementation and what Commissioner Harrington presented and what Commissioner Njobe is mentioning in terms of recommendations. I think for me, with everything said and done, how are we going to finance this? And Commissioner Mate talking about National Treasury. And previously I did say, if you want to get local government to toe the line, just have National Treasury in the room. That's all you need to do. And I think what is not clear to me, and I'll tell you my selfish reason why I'm asking this, is what are the discussions and what levels of engagements are we having with National Treasury and the appreciation of the need for climate finance, the mechanisms to get us there? We talk about green bonds, all of those. What is their understanding in terms of the engagement that we've been having with them? Because I think I mentioned that the trading reforms we talk about billions that are going to infrastructure development. And I think our interest as the country, at least at local government level, is that if we're going to invest in infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure are we building at a local government level that will be sustainable, serve communities, and basically contribute to our targets, the climate reduction or climate response targets. So, and the reason why I'm asking, on Tuesday, in Tshwane, we are having a roundtable with many entities, including National Treasury. And the question we're asking them is, what are the alternative ways to finance infrastructure? But the conversation about climate finance is basically silent. And for me, the way to influence that conversation on Tuesday, at least because I'll be having all of these financiers and the entities that deals with financing in South Africa, is understanding what is the level of appreciation from the side of National Treasury when we talk about climate finance. So if there has been a conversation, that would be helpful to me. Thank you so much, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Moya. I'm just wondering who can respond in particular to that last comment. And to Commissioner Kungeka, I think it's really important for us to keep track of the extent to which we are making an impact or are being ignored, right? And I think that's what you were getting to in layperson speak, and to find a way of flagging either increasing impact or lagging effect, and whether we're taken seriously or not is a function of our own internal capacities and orientation, but equally sometimes a function of the forces at play outside of this room. Commissioner Zainab.
Thank you. My question is about one of the recommendations from the strategy session around the stakeholder engagement and communications working group, or a potential for that. And if we could just get an update on the process and maybe timeline, given that there's already a work plan in place and many engagements have already been happening. And Dora, you mentioned it earlier, so if you could share a little bit about that. Thank you. Yeah, the stakeholder engagement and communications working group.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to defer the working group process and timelines to Blessing. And maybe if Devin wants to comment on National Treasury once I'm done, he can add. Executive Mayor, the discussions with Treasury are actually ongoing, and we have a very good working relationship with them. And we know what's recently coming out of National Treasury is the need to consolidate the whole climate financing architecture. You would have seen in recent months, Devin has dates, the National Treasury released a document called Climate Finance Framework, I believe, where they are just starting to map out the full bouquet of climate finance instruments available and how those can be used. I also saw DFFE is working on a climate finance strategy, so it would be interesting to see how we then align the DFFE process and the National Treasury process. But that work with Treasury is also in partnership with DBSA as part of the JTFM process that we are undertaking at the moment. And the whole team is then saying, yes, JTFM, yes, JETP, yes, JAREP, yes, credit guarantee vehicle and everything else. But what is the overall picture in terms of climate investment in the country? And that's the current question that everyone is answering, co-led by DBSA, National Treasury, as well as DFFE, as well as PCC. But we can have a thorough discussion on that. On recommendations, Commissioner Kungeka, you are correct, and the Deputy Chair mentioned it, and which is why I think earlier on I've mentioned that we've had to take a step back and do one-on-one engagements with key DGs, because it's very important to listen first before you act, because then you know what you are solving for, and you know there's clear understanding on both ends, and then you know that whatever product you're going to come out with is needed and will land where it's required to land. So hopefully this process will take us a long way forward. With your permission, Deputy Chair, I'm not sure if Devin would like to add on finance, and Blessing can respond on the process for the comms work. Thanks.
Thanks, Edie, and thanks, Deputy Chair and Commissioners. I mean, it is covered the issue fairly well. I think part of the challenge is not understanding where you can tap into climate finance to meet your specific needs. So whether it's for skilling, whether it's for project pipeline, or whether it's for project preparation. And I think what we've started an engagement with DBSA as we're thinking through the JTFM process is how do we map this and make that information publicly available. So there's two things that need to happen is one, alignment across government national departments around the various pieces of climate finance work they're doing at a policy or strategy level. Two is understanding where the locations are of climate finance and the instruments and the purposes of those instruments that we can undertake as PCC to work with DBSA to try to map. I think in terms of local government, Commissioner, one of the challenges that existed historically but would hopefully be resolved is through the climate budget tagging process, which was in pilot with National Treasury and is now being rolled out across provincial government as well as local government. And that's going to help one understand where the fiscus spend is going in terms of climate finance, but then also to do the connect with the private sector, with DFIs, in order to complement and supplement financial needs. So Chair, Deputy Chair, in terms of mapping, we commit to do that. We'll work with DBSA to get that information out and make it as publicly available as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Devin. Blessing?
Thanks and good afternoon, Commissioners and Deputy Chair and Edie. Indeed, Commissioners have done what we have done as the communications unit is we've done some baseline research to just analyze which other organizations similar to us might be having that. Others because communications they are co-function like SA Tourism or Brand SA or the Human Rights Commission, and we've actually tried to compare what kind of institutional structure at a strategy level, like a working group would do. And they've given us some feedback. We've got a baseline discussion document that would process in EXCO within the next 2 weeks. Because we don't have a commissioner reference group now to look into that, we would then table that at the 4 working groups in the next cycle and then take it to the chair of chairs. That would then sign it off and then bring it here. At the back of that, then would obviously be discussing the composition of that working group, what its work program would be. I know you've said the business plan is done, but the business plan for comms remains, even if you've got targeted so high level that whatever the work program comes out, you would be able to then put in themes, priority sectors, priority stakeholders. So it's flexible enough to build in the work program of such a working group. And we're looking forward to actually instituting it with. We think that it is the missing link of the priorities we had outlined and would do. The ED's report showed that we will then also bring in the communication strategy and implementation plan, because the last term had a 3-year strategy from 20 that just ended last year. So the main work program of that working group would be at the back of that, a draft 3-year communication outreach strategy as its initial work plan. So those would be those 2 documents then to sign off in the September meeting and then adopt the working group, signing off also the governance implications, remuneration and all those things. Thanks, ED. But we'll keep the commissioners in tab, and we really are looking forward to volunteers to sit in that working group. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Blessing. Commissioner Queen Mopeli, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all commissioners. My question is around the working group. I think it was myself that hammered on the point at the last strategy session about having a comms working group, and it was to advance, the scientific information, decoding it into languages and information that is easily, digestible for the people that we are here to represent. I've heard Mr. Manale's comments on the working group, but my problem is that it's a very high level, and we have already given options for it to start at a small level. We've got schools that are ready to have, some of these workshops given for free. We've also indicated in the previous session that we've got municipal buy-in, they've got their offices, they've got their halls, they've got everything that would not have a financial implication for the PCC to come and do the workshops, to come in. We do understand that we can't translate the scientific and the work that we're doing within a quarter, that we understand in all official languages. But there can be a targeted approach as to how we're going to communicate what we have already, maybe different provinces, different constituencies. We had already briefed the traditional leadership sector, the forums, as well as the COGTA established councils. They were ready, and they've been ready to take that information forward to cascade it down to the various constituents that fall under all the kingships of South Africa. So I do understand that there has to be a formal way that the working group is introduced and a strategy and how it fits into the comm strategy. But, an elephant is big. We can, chew it a piece at a time. So we do have already, willing participants. We've got cost-effective and cost-efficient ways to do some or other workshops. We've got, without belaboring the point, schools that are ready, local government that's also ready to take whatever little that we have already done to cascade it down, because it's like we sit here and then we come back again and then we make a little progress. We're going to sit in the next quarter. So a little bit of something goes along where we don't have to come there with a full-blown presentation. Even just the little that we're done or going to do will be effective, So really, really, I really beg that we try and do some or other thing for that. In the next strategy, in the next meeting, we have, report on what we've done in the communities that are affected most by the work that is done by the PCC. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Queen Neo. Prof. Edward, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm motivated to mention this one because we're talking about communication, all the reports having been presented. In our last workshop with Mestra, I think we talked about this other level of governance, which I think it's also important. It's at provincial level. There are provincial coordinating committees at provincial level that are planning, possibly without even knowing at what level we are as the Commission. And lately I've been engaging with the economic clusters in Limpopo. And they're very interested to have this communication and buy-in in terms of what is happening. They develop provincial development plans, which I think can also have a, what should I say, synergy in terms of funding, synergy in terms of matters we are doing on adaptation, energy, and so on. So I'm just raising it up again to say, at what level are we engaging at that level? Because that, I think, it's a very important forum that is happening at provincial, that talks to districts and also local municipalities.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Catherine, and then I'm going to allow Blessing 2 minutes to respond. I just want to warn everyone that you're eating into your lunchtime. I'm not going to make it longer than the agenda indicates.
I don't want to stand between people and their food, but just very quickly, I want to follow up on what the previous commissioner mentioned with regards to the communication. I think that there has to be a strategic, and perhaps Blessing will talk to this, but two very different strategic objectives of this working group, because there is the education from a climate perspective directly to community, but there's also communication to the general public of what the commission actually stands for, does, what the daily work is, stakeholder engagement. And so I think they two different things, and I understand the processes that Blessing has mentioned and needs to go through to get us to a point where we need to move forward. But I also agree that we need to try to make sure that we don't allow another quarter to lapse, and at the beginning of next year, at the start of a new school term or technically a new year, we do not have the ability to implement. And again, we're stuck on a great policy or a great working group on paper, but the implementation lacks. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Catherine. To paraphrase Blessing, we need to work at multiple tracks. It's not just highfalutin strategy that really looks nice in PowerPoint, but what we're talking about is operating across a multiplicity of levels so that the work that we do makes an impact as it relates to education, as it relates to ordinary people understanding what this thing called climate response is all about, and especially children and young people beginning to understand what climate change as well as the just transition means for their own futures.
Thanks, and I'll take less than a minute. Indeed, correct. I agree with both Commissioner Constantides and Queen Mupedi about the practicalization. And the unfortunate part is that we did not put in the detail in the ED's report, because in the past we'd separate the commission communications report, because it never worked group into a separate report. It would have some detail. It might not be sufficient what is done, but we reported on some work we've done for Youth Month. We want to do some work with schools in July. There is some work we want to do actually with traditional councils. When we're in the Northwest, we were approached by the Northwest for the House of Traditional Councils. It's just that we have not been able to put it into what we have done in the last 3 months, but we're actually nipping some of the elements. And the other reality was that our funding for comms is actually only flowing in now. That is massive to do that kind of outreach. And then just on the government relations, so indeed, Queen Mupedi, we are doing that. And we would not only present a strategy in September, we would actually present the actual, what are we doing, when do we want to go to this province, which media are we buying, which community radio station are we going to do, which graphics are we doing. So it will be as practical as that. In terms of, from Professor Namazubani, the government relations, that has been, we have started now with intergovernmental relations, that's the bilaterals that the ED reported with national departments. But we've been invited on an ad hoc basis in some provinces. The Northern Cape has invited us to their equivalent of a DG's cluster. The Eastern Cape invites us to their intergovernmental forums, Mpumalanga, but it's actually very inconsistent. We had a very fruitful meeting with Salga around driving a local government awareness, and we think that would sit at the induction of also the new cycle of councillors. So there are a number of entry points, and all points fair and square. We agree that there is not enough, and we need a massive outreach there, supported by other established institutions. And we've emphasized over and over again, government has got the biggest massive communication and outreach system, and we need to tap into it. Thanks.
Thank you, Blessing. So that was a segue. I didn't stop it from the Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group Chair's report, but I think it was a conversation worth having. So I apologize in advance for letting the conversation stray a little bit. What's left now is a minutes from the last commission meeting. Mrs. Jones, how do you want us to handle that? Page by page, or I take them as read because they were pre-distributed?
Yes, Chair, I'm pleased to confirm that following the last commission meeting, we did circulate them for review probably about the second week of April. And so there were no inputs received. I am happy to confirm that as far as the minutes are concerned, they are a fair and accurate reflection of the last meeting, which was in the inaugural meeting of this second term commission. However, I do want it to be noted, probably on record, that noting that the minutes of the working groups were a little bit more detailed reading, more like a novel bedtime reading for those that suffer from insomnia. We are trying to find the right balance between capturing the key discussions following the constructive feedback we got. So potentially the next set of minutes of the commission are going to have a bit more detail, but we are going to scale it down a little bit, and we ask for your indulgence and patience while we get that balance right. Thank you, Chair.
Something, Edie? No. So can I get a mover and a seconder for the adoption of these minutes as if a fair reflection of the conversations? Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Commissioner Kungeka. Very good. The minutes for the record have been approved as an accurate reflection of that commission meeting. On that note, colleagues, we are breaking for lunch. I know we've strayed into the lunchtime. I'm going to ask Edie, is it okay if we are back at 1 o'clock?
At 1 o'clock.
Oh, sorry.
It will
at 2 o'clock.
depend on time constraints of the NTCSA, but that would be fine if we return at 2 o'clock. Can I request that the secretariat staff remain in the room whilst commissioners and visitors go have lunch?
Yeah. Commissioners, please be back in the room, seated, ready to roll at 2 o'clock, please.